Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll have a story from Inside Energy from Emily Guerin. But first, joining me now is Concordia Professor of Religion, Jacqueline Bussey. Jacqueline, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, John.
Well, you're here to talk about a new book you have, and we'll get into that in just a little while. But before we do that, tell the folks a little about yourself and your background.
Yes. Well, I was born and raised Lutheran, but Lutheran in the South. So I'm actually from Florida. My family still lives in Florida, and I teach at Concordia, as you mentioned, and I also am the director of the Forum on Faith and Life there.
Okay. Well, now, how did you end up at Concordia?
Yeah, well, I was teaching at a sister school, one of the other ELCA schools in the network, and there was a position opening up, which was to start the Forum on Faith and Life, which is an intra-faith and interfaith center at the college. And I was recruited pretty hard for that position. They were very wonderful about saying, we think maybe you should do this. And I eventually consented to at least apply and give it a try, even though I was already a tenured professor somewhere else. And I thought, okay, well, let's try it. And I just came and I visited the school and I fell in love with it. And I thought, I have to do it. Even though I'm from Florida, moving to Fargo would be hard, but I said I had to do it.
Okay, and you've been here now about 6 years?
That's right. That's right.
Well, as I said, you're here to talk about your book. So your book is Outlaw Christian, and it's Finding Authentic Faith by Breaking the Rules. So a little bit of a provocative title there. Can you tell us, what's it about and explain it to us?
Yeah. Well, the provocative title is intentional. Outlaw Christian is a phrase that comes from one of my favorite novelists, Reynolds Price. And I thought, I love that phrase. And a lot of people had told me, you're an outlaw Christian. And I wanted to think about what that word meant for me. So to me, when I define outlaw Christianity, an outlaw Christian is a person who is no longer willing to hide their grief, doubt, anger, scars, or questions from God or from each other. So that's what I mean. I'm not talking about just sort of breaking any rules, that you want, but I am talking about certain rules such as never get mad at God and don't doubt and ask questions and, always speaking cliches about evil and suffering. A lot of the things that we're asked to do, I'm saying, no, I'd prefer straight talk on those issues.
Okay. Well, can you talk some maybe about your life and your faith growing up?
Yeah. I had a very strong faith background growing up. My mother and I and my family, we attended church, every weekend. And I sang in the church choir, with my mother and did all those sorts of things. But it was about when I was 20 years old when things started to change in my life, because my mother she was only 50, and she came down with early onset Alzheimer's disease and proceeded to be very sick and really dying for the next 17 years of her life. And I was her primary caregiver in the summertime for all those 17 years. And it just challenged a lot of the things that I believed, John, just almost everything, really. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, you never really know what you believe until your life depends on it. And I think that my life depended on it, in some ways, every day with the caregiving. What was it that I really believed?
So is that when it changed for you, for the human suffering part of it? You said about 20 years old?
Yeah. I mean, it took many years, because in the beginning, we didn't know how long that she would suffer in that way. And I want to be clear that the other thing about suffering is once your eyes are opened to the suffering of anyone you love, I believe they're open to a lot of the suffering in the world. So I just started to just see a lot of things that I think my eyes have been closed to because of my privilege, quite frankly.
Okay. Well, we hear that church membership is declining in the country. Why is that, you think?
Yeah. I think there's so many reasons for that. I mean, I wouldn't be audacious enough to name, just one right one. But one that I would like to name that I think I address in the book, my experience of teaching students for 14 years, teaching theology and courses like The Problem of Evil, is that a lot of my students and the young people I meet experience a big disconnect between their lives and church. And they are craving for a place to be able to lament and to be able to share their grief. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of expectation in some churches that it's a happy, clappy place where you need to be happy and you need to, not mourn as one who doesn't have hope. And there's a lot of these expectations. And for a lot of people, that's really hard. They are suffering and they need a space to lament. And I just pose the question, are we really providing that? I'm not convinced that we are.
Okay. Obviously, I assume you've spoken to other Christians who feel the same way as you do and feel it's okay to have doubts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, there's several, well-known theologians and spiritual heroes of mine that I've read who kind of led me in this direction. And one I would say is the Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner, Elie Wiesel. Many people have read his works. And Elie Wiesel is very clear about, doubt is not the opposite of faith. Doubt is, the opposite of faith, he would say, is just indifference, right? But doubt is a sign that your faith has a pulse. It's a sign that your faith is alive and you're taking seriously the suffering of the world. And so you're asking God and you're asking the world, why is this happening? That's very difficult to reconcile with a loving God. And I think if you have that kind of love for human beings, it leads to doubt.
So what is your view of sort of the Old and New Testament in terms of what can be documented and what actually happened? And I assume then in your mind it's okay to doubt some of these stories.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it may be. A necessity to doubt some of their contemporary applications. I think that there's a lot of troubling texts in the Old and New Testaments. There's things in the New Testament speaking about women not being able to speak in church. These are things that my own tradition has already disagreed with, and moved in a different direction from that. So I believe that the biblical texts have always been made to be interpreted by the community, and that's why we have so many diverse religious groups already in the United States, from, let's say, the Amish to a Catholics. I mean, they're not interpreting the biblical text in the same way, and that's because they are relying on their mind and their prayer life and their community to help interpret the text. And I kind of have always believed, it was a very famous thinker who once said that, a myth is something that never was true, but always is. And that's the way I feel about biblical texts.
Well, then can you tell us about the God has a planned aspect of in some forms of Christianity? And I understand that you reject this.
Yeah. Well, and I know this is sensitive, and I know that this is really something. The idea that God has a plan brings comfort to a lot of people. I guess I wouldn't really deny the idea that God has a plan. I would just say that it's not always being fulfilled, and that I also would believe that it's our hands that have to make a lot of God's plan come to fulfillment. I think if we want to have justice in this world, we're taught to seek justice. We're taught to liberate the oppressed. These things, I don't believe we should sit around and wait on God to do them, right? So I consider us sort of co-creators of the future with God, and I believe that that's a freedom that we have been given.
Okay. Well, we've asked before we get on, can you read us a passage from the book Outlaw Christian?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I'll choose to read from the end.
Okay.
The other day, a student interviewed me for a class assignment. The last question she asked me was, what is one thing you would want everyone to know that you have not yet said? I want to leave you with the same answer I gave her, because it sums up best all I want to say as an outlaw Christian about vocation, grace, hope, and joy. Every day during the warmer months of the year, I walk to work. My walk is a couple of miles, and it is beautiful. The Red River divides the city where I live, Fargo, North Dakota, from the city where I work, Moorhead, Minnesota. A pedestrian bridge that I have to cross hangs over the Red River. Every time I cross this bridge, I feel as though nature itself helps transition me from work to home or home to work and back again. Whenever my feet hit the bridge's wood slats, no matter which direction I am headed, my heart sings. Heading east in the morning, I can't wait to see my students whom I have missed during the evening. Heading west in the evening, I can't wait to see my husband whom I have missed during the day. And then one day on the bridge, a thought hit me that is the truest thing that I know about my life to date. And the thought was this: love waits for me on both sides of the river. No matter what you have been through, what you have done or left undone, may you too one day know this to be the truest thing about your own life: Love waits for you on both sides of the river.
Okay, thank you. Now that was from the end, but I understand chapter 5 is titled Scared to Tell Your Real Story. What does that mean?
Yeah, this is something that's very important to me. And here, one of the things I'm talking about is these different cliches, these different sayings that we teach one another that I think have the message that vulnerability is weakness and vulnerability is wrong. These kinds of sayings are things that we say to one another like, don't air your dirty laundry. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve. You know, what is the message of those things? The message of those is that there's certain things that we shouldn't be talking about. And this to me is very troubling because in my experience, you know, of having walked alongside students and people in the pews for so many years, many people are suffering from a secret grief. And those griefs include things such as mental illness or sexual assault or abuse. And these things are considered taboo. These are not things that we want people to talk about. We don't really want to hear it. It might make us uncomfortable. And this, I believe, is damaging people so deeply. It creates a shame culture around things that people should not feel ashamed about because they were things that were done to them. And this is one of the things I'm hoping to change with the book.
Okay. You also write about ways to finding hope.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah. Well, the Ways to Finding Hope chapter mostly comes through my own struggle, you know, with depression and despair during the caregiving of my mother. And I have several recommendations for, you know, how one might cultivate hope. And I can just name a couple of those. One, I think, is showing people your authentic self. Because I think sometimes we worry that we're not really loved. And I think maybe we worry that because we haven't actually shown other people who we truly are. They only see the mask wearing us. And so authenticity is, I think, a beautiful way that hope can be cultivated, because then when people love us, we know they're truly loving us. Another thing I would say is sharing our stories of hope. You know, in the book I have a lot of stories of hope, you know, that I've learned through the years, you know, historical events, amazing things that have happened, and I share a lot of those. And I also, I think, most tangibly recommend keeping a hope journal as a spiritual practice. And this is very simple. A hope journal is just a journal in which I write one thing a day that was a moment of grace or something that gave me hope. And during the time that I was taking care of my mother, this was something I think that honestly saved my life. You know, I felt that I started living differently because I was watching out of the corner of my eye for that moment in the day that would make it to the page. So.
Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit about maybe who influenced you here,
Yeah.
but can you talk more in depth about the research you did for the book, the interviews you did, and with authorities and religious figures?
Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, it really comes out of, I'll be honest with you, it comes out of 14 years, you know, teaching and having gotten a degree in theology in graduate school and just continuing that reading all along. I would also say it just comes from regular folks. I mean, I think that regular people, my students, you know, my friends, they're the ones who've taught me so much, really, that really goes into the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned 14 years. How long did it take you to write the book?
Yeah. Well, that's something sometimes I don't want my publisher to know. It really did take me about 5 years. And the reason being is that, you know, I'm very busy as a professor and I don't work on it during the school year because we just don't have time. So it was really 5 years of summers, I would say. So it took a long time, but it was very healing.
So what's the reaction been to the book so far?
Oh, yeah. Wow. I have to tell you that this has been the best part about, you know, previously I only published academic book, and this is a non-academic book, right? More so. And the reaction has been one of the most moving things in my life. I would say, and this is truly no exaggeration, that every day I've received handwritten letters, I receive Facebook messages, people find me online, and they write me an email of people saying, you know, you've wrapped words around all the things that are in my heart. And that's what you've done in this book, and I connect with that. I've had people write to me from Buenos Aires, Argentina. You know, a student was on the train and she was reading it. She said, you know, I'm just in tears because, you know, I want to share with you my real story. So I have so many people who respond to the chapter on Tell Your Real Story, and they've written to me, and they've entrusted me with some of the deepest stories of sorrow of their life. And I feel like that is such a gift that anyone would trust me like that. And so to me, the book is a success for that reason, just because the response that I've seen.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you've written another book. I guess I've got a title here, Laughter of the Oppressed. Can you tell us about that briefly?
Yes. Laughter of the Oppressed was my first book, and I grew out of my graduate student work. And basically, for that, I did research of different religious groups, including, Holocaust survivors and African American slaves and Japanese Christians at a time when being Christian in Japan was punishable by death. And I looked at those different groups and I researched what laughter was doing in that situation of oppression and how it was a tool of resistance against the oppressor. And it was fascinating because in each of those communities, as diverse as they are, laughter was functioning in the same way as a tool of resistance to the system of oppression.
Okay. Well, we said you're a professor at Concordia College in Moorhead. Can you tell us about some of the courses that you teach there?
Yeah. Well, teaching is my first love, and so I just love all the courses that I get to teach at Concordia. I am the co-chair of our Interfaith Studies program, so I teach courses in Interfaith Studies, which gives students the leadership skills they need to be an interfaith leader in today's religiously diverse world. I teach a Problem of Evil class, I teach a Modern Christian Thought class, I teach a Liberation Theology and Service Learning class, and next fall I'm teaching a service learning course on compassion and hope that I'm just very excited about.
Okay, so a number of courses there. Yes. Well, now I understand, of course, you're from Florida, you said originally,
yes.
And your husband is in the movie producing work, and I guess it often takes him elsewhere. So how has the transition and adjustment been to living in North Dakota and working in Minnesota?
Yes. Well, I have to say, we've survived 5 winters, which is something we're very proud of. And the transition at first is difficult. Obviously, I've never lived anywhere that it's so cold, and that's quite an adjustment. But I have decided that, I've learned that your vocation can keep you warm wherever you are, and the people are warm, and I love my job. And as I said, in the portion of the book that I read, if you can get up on Monday morning and be happy about where you have to go and the people you're going to spend your day with, there's really no greater gift than that. So it doesn't really matter to me where I live. But I can say that I'm already in contract writing the sequel for Outlaw Christian, and I have an entire chapter on sort of falling in love with Fargo. So. Because that's happened for me. So.
Well, then I was just about to ask you, what do you hope will happen with this book? But so you're writing the sequel to this book, and when do you expect that it might be out?
Yes. Well, my publisher expects that I will have the manuscript to them by March 30th of 2017, and it'll be out about a year after that. But this month, and really throughout the rest of this academic year, I'm traveling for the book, and I have about 5 speaking engagements across the country on the book just this month.
Okay. If people want a copy of the book, where can they go?
Anywhere. JacquelineBussey.com, Amazon.com, it's even on Walmart.com, or also our local bookstore, Zambros.
Okay. Jacqueline, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned for more. Dickinson, North Dakota is a very different place than it was 2 years ago when this oilfield town of less than 30,000 people was one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Since then, the price of oil has fallen by more than 50%. Nowhere are signs of the slowdown more visible than along Dickinson's Highway 22. Inside Energy's Emily Guerin went on a road trip and has this report.
So let me get out onto 22 and then we will start our journey.
I've spent 2 years reporting on the Bakken oil field in North Dakota. I've seen it when it was booming back in 2014 and now when it's busting. There's one highway in the oil field town of Dickinson, Highway 22, where you can see the entire boom and bust story. So we're going on a road trip through Oil Bust Alley to see what we can learn in this 5-mile stretch of road about how a community changes when the price of oil crashes. Let's start with the obvious losers, businesses directly involved in the drilling and production of oil.
So I'm standing in front of a field of stacked drilling rigs. There's about 27 back there, we just counted. And that's actually about the same amount that are actively drilling for oil in North Dakota. 2 years ago, when the price of oil was high, there were over 180. And it's really a sign of how much things have slowed down here in the oil field.
Every time a drilling rig gets idled, about 120 people lose their jobs. People like Kaylee Haugen's husband, who worked on a drilling rig for over a decade before being laid off last year. Haugen has also seen a huge impact of the slowdown on her business, the uniform unit, which is right on Highway 22.
We do uniforms for a variety of industries. We do flame-resistant clothing for the oil and gas industry as well as electrical. We do scrubs, medical uniforms, and then we also have brought in tactical for the EMS management services.
The uniform unit just opened last spring, right as oil prices were tanking.
If we would have been operating, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I would bet 90% of our business would have been oil field. Now I would say we're pretty even within the different fields. I would say 30% oil field, 30% tactical, 30% scrubs. So definitely different than I thought.
Hotels have also been hit hard by the slowdown. Over 1,000 new hotel rooms were built in Dickinson in the past 12 years. Connie Hank and Bill Evans manage and do maintenance in 3 of those hotels just off Highway 22.
When I got here in March of 14, there were no vacancies. If somebody checked out, you probably already had somebody's name who was waiting on that room.
You would have been paid $80 a night for a single and almost over just about $100 for a double. That was cheap. And now you can get a room for $32 a night. That's a big change.
Drastic.
Now their hotels are at less than 30% occupancy.
Come here.
They end up with a lot of time on their hands.
I'm sitting here waiting, praying that a car pulls into my parking lot. And that is the truth. We looked like a bunch of vultures. The minute they walked in the door, I was like, hey, thank you for coming here,
Just down the highway, there are signs that other parts of the housing market are also hurting.
So coming up, there's this man camp graveyard. It's just this field full of trailers that are just like jumbled together, almost piled on top of each other, because people don't have a need to house these workers anymore because they've laid off so many of their employees.
The slowdown in the oil field hasn't been uniformly bad. Custom cabinet maker TMI Systems had 25% growth last year. That means they need a lot of new workers.
And then over here, it's grabbing those boards and turning them if they need to be.
General Manager Tom Kronk says a few years ago, the cost of living was high in Dickinson due to the housing shortage brought on by the influx of oil workers.
But with the rents where they were at, it was tough to even attract people at that, because even though we had good wages, the rents were beyond where they could justify moving out here to work for us.
But now, there's no longer a labor shortage. There are far more applicants than job openings, and rental prices are dropping. So TMI Systems is having no trouble hiring.
As time went on, the oil field layoffs got deeper and deeper, and pretty soon we started seeing some of our former employees coming back.
Scott Wind is one of them. He worked at TMI for 21 years before leaving in 2012 to load crude oil onto rail cars.
For me, I was looking for a challenge, possibly a little higher pay. Obviously, that's an attraction for people. But with the slowdown in the oil business, I wanted to look for other opportunities, and one of the first things that came to mind for me was TMI.
The slowdown is also benefiting the local government. Dickinson City Administrator Sean Kessel says hiring is easier and expenses are lower because they no longer have to compete with higher oil field salaries. But on the downside, the oil bust has sent tax revenue tumbling.
So we've lost about $1.5 million into our general fund. That's a big hit for the general fund. Our general fund is about $16 million. So to lose 1.5 out of that fund causes you to be creative.
Creative. If I've learned anything covering the oil field, it's that oil booms and busts force communities, individuals, and businesses to be creative. Take this Taco Bell right on Highway 22.
You can order when you're ready.
Hi, can I get an order of nachos, please?
They couldn't hire or retain workers during the boom because it was so easy to get a higher paying job. So they decided to triage. For a while, only their drive-thru was open. You couldn't go inside. Now they're fully staffed again. As we headed out of town, we drove past the drilling rig graveyard one last time. For Kessel, those idled rigs are actually a sign that the oil industry hasn't given up on North Dakota.
What that means is when they stack them like that, they can respond quickly when things change. When that price goes up, they can just simply move it from that rig yard to wherever their list is on the wells that they want to invest in next.
Like many people in western North Dakota, Kessel wants the oil activity to come back, just not quite as crazy as last time. I'm Emily Guerin, reporting from Highway 22 in Dickinson, North Dakota.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Post this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Inside Energy is a project of Prairie Public in cooperation with public broadcasters in Colorado and Wyoming, funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. See more at insideenergy.org. And by the members of Prairie Public.